After my husband passed away, his mother said, "I'm taking the house, the law firm, all of it except the daughter." I said, "Let them have everything." Everyone thought I'd lost my mind. At the final hearing, I signed the papers. She was smiling, until her lawyer turned white when, the morning my mother-in-law walked into my kitchen with a metal tape measure and a leather briefcase, my husband had been dead for 11 days. 11 days. The flowers people sent were still dying on the windowsill. Maya's cereal bowl from breakfast was still in the sink, and the house still smelled, faintly, heartbreakingly, like Joel's sandalwood cologne. That specific, expensive scent he'd sprayed on his neck 45 minutes before his heart stopped beating on a mundane Thursday morning while I was upstairs making the bed. I was 34 years old. I was holding a mug of coffee that had gone cold 2 hours earlier and hadn't noticed. And I was watching my brother-in-law, Spencer, drag a metal tape measure across my hardwood floors. He was humming. Actually humming. Pulling the silver tape across the grain of the oak floors I'd spent 3 years picking out stain colors for. Snapping cell phone pictures of the antique credenza Joel and I had found at an estate sale in Vermont on our 5th anniversary. He moved through my living room like a gleeful eviction officer surveying a foreclosed property. 32 years old. Never held a job longer than 8 months. Always smelled faintly of someone else's cigarettes and his mother's money. And his mother, Carla Fredel, was standing across the kitchen island from me. I want you to understand something about Carla before I tell you what she said next. Carla was a woman composed entirely of sharp angles and strategic malice. Expensive Botox, tailored gray blazer, hair blown out like she was about to ring a bell at the New York Stock Exchange. She hadn't shed a single visible tear at her oldest son's funeral 4 days prior. She hadn't hugged me. She hadn't knelt down to look Maya in the eyes and said, "Grandma's here, baby." She had stood at the graveside with her hands folded in front of her like she was attending a particularly tedious board meeting. She was not here to mourn. She was here to execute. Joel's law firm was built on my initial capital, Miriam, she said. Her voice was the sound of gravel being dragged across concrete. Deliberate. Abrasive. The $300,000 down payment on this house? Mine. The Fredel name on that firm's letterhead? That's my equity. My investment. My legacy. I stared at her. My throat was raw from crying for 11 straight days and from not sleeping, and from reading the same 2 paragraphs of Maya's bedtime story 6 nights in a row because I kept losing my place. Carla, the funeral was 4 days ago. She didn't flinch. She picked up a silver spoon from the marble counter and meticulously, almost compulsively, aligned it with the edge of the placemat. Grief doesn't pause commerce. Then she reached into her designer tote and dropped a thick legal folder onto the island with a sound like a gavel strike. "Here is your reality," she said, leaning forward, manicured hands flat on the granite. "You are a stay-at-home mother with a degree in art history. You cannot manage a corporate law firm generating over $620,000 annually. You cannot maintain a $2 million estate on your own. You will sign the assumption of estate paperwork, relinquish all claims to this house, the firm, and the primary estate accounts, or I will drag you through a probate battle that will bankrupt whatever small savings you have left and take years off your life." She tapped the folder. One sharp acrylic nail on the cover. "And Maya?" I whispered. Carla glanced toward the hallway. Somewhere behind that wall, my 3-year-old daughter was napping. Her father's daughter. The child with Joel's dark curls and his long fingers and his habit of humming while she played. "You can keep the girl," Carla said. The words landed like a slap. Flat. Entirely without warmth. "I've raised my children. I have no interest in taking on your burdens, but the assets return to the source." She reduced a newly fatherless 3-year-old to a burden in the same tone you'd use to decline a second helping of pasta. My friends had begged me to hire someone brutal, a real fighter, the kind of attorney who makes opposing counsel lose sleep. They told me I was entitled to half the firm, equity in the house, everything. They told me to burn Carla to the ground for what she was doing, but my friends didn't know what I'd found 3 nights ago. I had been on my knees in Joel's home office at 2 in the morning, my face swollen from crying, frantically rifling through his mahogany desk looking for the life insurance paperwork. I'd checked every drawer twice, and then my fingers found the bottom of the largest drawer, the resistance, the slight gap in the wood. I pressed it and the false bottom lifted. What was inside stopped my breathing entirely. It stopped it so completely that Maya, asleep down the hall, actually stirred and called out for me in her sleep, and I couldn't answer her for almost 30 seconds. So as Spencer stretched his tape measure across the doorframe of the nursery, my daughter asleep on the other side of that door, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the coffee mug at anyone's head. I took one slow, cold sip of the terrible coffee, and I said, "Okay, Carla, have your lawyer set up the meeting." 2 days later, I walked into the conference room of Carla's downtown legal counsel dressed precisely the way she expected me to be dressed. Simple black cardigan, minimal makeup, hair pulled back like I hadn't slept, which was true, though not for the reasons anyone in that room assumed. I kept my eyes slightly downcast, let my shoulders carry the posture of a woman who had already surrendered before she sat down. I had thought carefully about every detail of that performance. The room was on the 40th floor, floor-to-ceiling glass, city skylines sprawling arrogantly in every direction, the kind of room designed to make regular people feel small. The air smelled of legal paper, and Carla's cloying floral perfume, and the particular brand of expensive leather that exists only in briefcases owned by men who charge $400 an hour. Carla sat across from me like a conquering monarch, dark silk, heavy gold, posture so rigid it looked painful. Beside her sat Richard Vance, her attorney. I had done my research on Richard Vance, 17 years in corporate estate law, known for aggressive asset recovery, had once successfully litigated a contested inheritance worth $40 million over 22 months. Sharp eyes, bespoke suit, a man who had built his career on precisely the kind of instinct that was currently, even now, making him study my face like he was trying to find the tripwire. "Let's review the terms of the settlement," Richard said, sliding the document across the polished mahogany toward me. His voice was professionally neutral, but his eyes were doing something else entirely. They were moving, calculating. I kept mine still. "I've read it," I said softly. The tremor in my voice was calibrated, not excessive, just enough to suggest exhaustion and defeat. "I'll relinquish all claims to the marital home, the law firm, and all primary estate bank accounts." Carla's lips stretched into a smile. Vicious, hungry, the smile of a woman who had been waiting for this moment since the funeral. "In exchange," I continued, and here I let my eyes come up, just briefly, to meet Richard's. "I want two things. First, full, uncontested sole legal and physical custody of Maya. Second, an ironclad permanent injunction, signed by Carla, stating she will never contest Joel's will, pursue grandparents' rights, or attempt to claim any further assets outside this specific transfer." Richard's pen stopped moving. He didn't write anything down. He just held the pen suspended over his notepad, and then he leaned back very slowly in his leather chair, and the creak of it was extraordinarily loud in the silence that followed. He looked at the contract, then at me, then at the contract again. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Carla." He turned slightly toward her, lowering his voice. "I need us to pause. I want to delay this signing by 2 weeks minimum." Carla's head whipped around like a cobra strike. "Absolutely not. She's agreeing too easily," Richard said, and his voice had dropped to something tight and genuinely alarmed. "No one hands over a firm doing $620,000 annually without demanding an equity payout. No one surrenders a $2 million home without at minimum requesting a buyout of her contribution. Something is wrong, Carla. I need a forensic accountant on the firm's ledgers and a title search on the property before you sign a single—" "Don't be ridiculous," Carla snapped, and the contempt in her voice was so absolute it filled the room. "I saw the revenue reports Joel showed me at Christmas. The firm is thriving. The client list is a goldmine. She's surrendering because she's weak and she knows she can't manage what I built." She turned back to me, her eyes glittering with triumph and pity and something deeply ugly that lived beneath both of them. "She'll change her mind if we give her 2 weeks. I am not letting her walk out of here and come back with a real lawyer. Carla, as your legal counsel, I am formally and unambiguously advising you against signing an assumption of estate without full financial disclosure," Richard said, and his voice was now carrying the strained, overpronounced quality of a man who needed to make sure his warning was on the record. "You will be legally assuming total personal liability for everything attached to those assets." "I am assuming my son's legacy," Carla hissed, and she held out her hand. Richard didn't give her the pen. She grabbed it from his breast pocket instead. She looked at me across the table, her face arranged into the precise expression of someone who believes they have won so completely and permanently that the other person is no longer worth contempt. Just pity. Empty, satisfied pity. "You always were a coward, Miriam," Carla said. "Too weak to handle real power." I didn't blink. I pushed the signature page across the table. She pressed the gold Mont Blanc to the watermarked paper. Her signature was theatrical, a wide, aggressive arc. The pen pressed so hard it nearly tore through. Every stroke legally, permanently, irrevocably bound her to something she couldn't begin to imagine. I sat with my hands folded in my lap and counted the seconds. The notary public stepped forward. His seal hit the final page with a heavy, definitive thud. Done. I stood up, smoothed my cardigan, and for the first time since sitting down in that room, I let my spine go entirely straight. Carla looked up at me from her seat, still holding the signed contract against her chest like a trophy. "I hope you learn to stand on your own," she said, her voice echoing off the glass walls with malicious satisfaction. "Without a Fredel around to prop you up." I looked at her for a long moment. "Goodbye, Carla," I said. I turned my back, walked through the glass doors, stepped into the elevator, rode 40 floors down to the lobby in absolute crystalline silence, pushed through the revolving doors into the cold March air. A black town car was at the curb. I slid into the back seat, gave the driver the hotel address, and for the first time in 2 weeks, exhaled completely. I opened my purse. Inside, in a plain white envelope, was a bank statement. It was for a private account containing exactly $1,500,000. The life insurance policy Joel had taken out 7 years ago, shortly after we married, named me, only me, as the sole direct beneficiary. Because it paid directly to a named individual, it bypassed probate entirely. It was legally and completely separate from Joel's estate, tax-free, untouchable by creditors, invisible to Carla. She had just stolen a burning building, and I was holding a fireproof bag. Let me tell you what I found in the false bottom of Joel's desk. Not old tax returns, not a forgotten savings bond. A thick handwritten letter in a manila envelope addressed, in Joel's precise architect-neat handwriting, simply to Miriam. It was a suicide note. Joel hadn't died of a sudden heart attack. He had intentionally overdosed on a lethal combination of unprescribed beta blockers and amphetamines that induced massive cardiac arrest. He had constructed it to look like a medical emergency because he'd done the research and confirmed that manner of death wouldn't void the insurance policy, not if it couldn't be proven intentional. He had done this for Maya. He had structured pictured his death like a final transaction, the last responsible financial decision he'd ever make, because he had run out of any other options. He was 72 hours from federal arrest. The $620,000 in annual revenue that Carla had so confidently cited, the number she'd seen on a Christmas spreadsheet and accepted as gospel, fabricated, meticulously, systematically falsified. Joel was a gambling addict, offshore sports betting, catastrophic cryptocurrency positions, a spiral he'd hidden from me behind the architecture of our expensive lifestyle for years. To cover the losses, he had been committing wire fraud. He had embezzled over $3 million directly from his clients' escrow and trust accounts, the accounts where people put down payments for houses, where small businesses parked operating capital, where estates waited to be properly distributed. The firm wasn't a gold mine. It was a crater disguised with fresh paint. The house carried 3 hidden high-interest liens filed against the equity, using forged signatures, borrowed from shadow market private lenders who had already initiated pre-foreclosure proceedings as of the Tuesday I sat in that conference room. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division had an active flag on his accounts for multi-year, multi-million-dollar tax evasion. And by signing the assumption of estate, by seizing the entire portfolio to avoid the protections and delays of standard probate because she was too greedy and too arrogant and too certain of her own intelligence to wait 2 weeks, Carla had legally assumed personal liability for every single dollar of it. Every debt, every lien, every federal flag, every defrauded client. She didn't inherit an empire. She inherited a federal indictment with marble countertops. Back in the 40th floor conference room, approximately 11 minutes after I rode the elevator down to my new life, Carla was pouring herself a glass of sparkling water from the silver carafe. "I want the firm's primary operating accounts transferred into my name by tomorrow morning," she was telling Richard, her voice thick with self-congratulation. She was never going to fight. Weakness is hereditary. Her mother was the same way. I met her once at the rehearsal dinner, and I knew immediately. Richard wasn't listening. He had the estate portfolio open in front of him. He hadn't put it away. He was the kind of attorney who could not let a nagging instinct go unexamined, even after the document was signed, even when there was nothing legally left to be done. He had the financial disclosures pulled from the back of the file, the pages that had been buried under the inflated revenue projections Joel's bank had forwarded, the pages Richard hadn't had time to review because Carla had bulldozed the process. He was reading the preliminary liability disclosures now. The color left his face like water draining from a tub. Fast, complete. He made a sound. Not a word. A sound. Something between a choke and a gasp. The kind of involuntary vocalization that happens when your nervous system processes something before your brain can fully formulate a response. The file hit the mahogany table. He dropped it like it burned him. "Carla." His voice came out barely above a whisper. "What have you done?" It wasn't a question. Carla frowned, put down her water glass. "What are you talking about?" Richard shot up from his chair. He was a composed man by nature and profession. 17 years of high-stakes estate law had filed most of the raw reactivity out of him. But he did not look composed now. He looked like a man watching something irreversible happen in real time, and knowing there was absolutely nothing he could do to stop it. "You signed a personal assumption of an estate carrying over $3 million in client embezzlement liability," he said, his voice cracking on the last word. "The revenue reports were fabricated, Carla. The firm is in the red by over $3 million. The operating accounts have active liens from a third-party bonding agency. Joel didn't mismanage funds. He stole from his clients' trust accounts, the ones you just assumed personal responsibility for." Carla's smug expression shifted, slowly, like a landslide. Not all at once, but in stages, each second revealing more of the catastrophe beneath. "That's," she started. "The house has 3 hidden mortgages filed against the equity," Richard continued, grabbing the file and shoving the liability pages across the table. "Shadow market lenders, pre-foreclosure as of last Tuesday. The $2 million valuation is underwater by more than the house is worth." He paused, pressed both hands flat on the table. "And the IRS Criminal Investigation Division has an active inquiry open on Joel's accounts. Multi-year tax evasion, Carla. The kind that comes with prosecution, not just penalties." Carla's hands were shaking. "I know this because Richard described it later, during his own deposition in the subsequent malpractice inquiry. Because Richard, in a desperate act of self-preservation, fully documented everything that happened in that room after I left. He described how she scrambled forward and grabbed the ledger, how her eyes moved frantically across the numbers without seeming to process them, how she knocked the sparkling water off the table and neither of them moved to clean it up. "Cancel it," Carla said. Her voice had gone strange, high and thin, like it was being produced by a body that had forgotten how to regulate its own volume. "Tear it up. Call her back. Richard, cancel the contract. It's filed," Richard said. The notary's digital copy transmitted automatically to the probate court the second his seal hit the paper. "It is done. It is irreversible. You bypassed probate to assume this estate, Carla. You bypassed every protection that process would have afforded you." He picked up his briefcase from the floor. "And my retainer does not cover federal criminal defense." He walked out. Carla was left alone in the glass conference room on the 40th floor, surrounded by a spectacular view of the city, kneeling on the floor amidst the shattered remains of a sparkling water glass, holding a folder full of numbers that spelled the end of everything she had spent her life accumulating. The federal government and the defrauded clients of Joel Freddel's firm descended on the estate within 6 weeks. They were thorough. They were relentless. And they had, in Carla, a single legally designated responsible party whose name name was at the top of every document, 6 months after the signing. I know what happened in the federal bankruptcy courtroom because I read the filings. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. Judge Harold Simmons, 23 years on the federal bench, presided. The defrauded clients were represented by 3 separate firms. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division sent 2 agents. Richard Vance submitted a formal declaration distancing himself and his firm from the transaction, citing his documented, on-record objections to the signing process. That declaration did not save him from a separate bar inquiry, but it did keep him out of criminal exposure. Carla sat at the defendant's table looking like a woman who had aged 2 decades in 6 months. The sharp blazers were gone. The gold jewelry was gone, sold or seized, or both. She wore a cheap pale blouse, and her hair was pulled back without any of the architectural precision she'd maintained her entire adult life. The judge's gavel came down. His voice was not unkind. It was simply absolute. Due to the legal assumption of the liabilities of Joel Freddel's estate and the resulting multi-million-dollar deficit owed to defrauded creditors and the federal government, this court orders the immediate and total liquidation of personal assets to satisfy outstanding claims. They took the estate she'd lived in for 30 years, the retirement accounts, the stock portfolio, the 2 vehicles. Spencer, who had measured my door frames with a tape measure while my daughter slept on the other side of the wall, found himself effectively homeless, his mother's accounts empty, his access to the only financial safety net he'd ever known permanently severed. They had tried to take everything from me. They had simply taken everything from themselves instead. I was sitting on the cedar deck of my house in North Carolina when the letter arrived. Coastal town, salt air, oak trees bordering the property line. I'd bought the house outright in cash. No mortgage, no liens, no history. A clean title in my name and Maya's name. Purchased with a portion of the insurance money and signed the same week I moved us out of a hotel and into a life that belonged entirely to us. The letter was multi-page, handwritten on the stationery of a roadside motel on the outskirts of Chicago. It had that quality of something written and rewritten many times. The pressure of the pen varied, some words scratched out, the margins crowded with second thoughts. Carla was asking for money, asking for access to Maya, asking me to consider, in light of everything, her years of sacrifice and her position as Joel's mother and her current circumstances, whether I might extend a loan against the insurance money she had somehow learned about. The letter went, without ceremony, directly into the shredder in my home office. 2 years later, late May, the kind of Saturday afternoon the coast saves for occasions when you actually have time to notice it. Azure sky, gentle wind, the smell of salt, and something flowering along the back fence. I was 36 years old. I had a boutique art gallery in the downtown district, 6 blocks from the water, featuring local painters and ceramicists and photographers. I had opened it with a portion of the insurance money and built it slowly, carefully, the way I had learned to build things, without shortcuts, without borrowed foundations. It was doing well. The local paper had run a small profile. A regional arts magazine was interested in a feature. I had a staff of 3 and a waiting list of artists who wanted to show there. Out in the backyard, Maya, 5 years old now, vibrant and intensely particular about her color choices, was standing in front of a small wooden easel I'd found at a craftsman market 3 towns over. She was wearing a paint-splattered smock that used to be white. She was mixing colors on a palette with the deep, focused expression of someone engaged in important work, which she was. I watched her from the porch railing with a glass of lemonade cold in my hand. I thought sometimes about that conference room, the smell of Carla's perfume and Richard Vance's leather briefcase, the sound of the notary's seal, the 40-floor elevator ride down to a town car idling at a curb, the city loud and indifferent outside the tinted windows, the white envelope in my purse, the stillness in my chest. People had thought I was broken. They had watched me surrender a house and a firm and every visible marker of financial security and concluded that grief had made me irrational, that the trauma had stripped me of my capacity to fight. They hadn't understood what I understood, which was simple. When you are standing inside a burning building someone else set on fire, the most intelligent thing you can do is hold the door open for them, step outside into the clean air, and walk away while they burn to ash in the fire they set themselves. I had walked away. I had breathed clean air. I had built, slowly, carefully, without borrowed foundations, something real. Maya looked up from her painting and held it out toward me, both arms fully extended, the universal gesture of a child who has finished something important and needs it witnessed. The painting was a sun rising over water. The colors were not quite right in any technical sense, and were absolutely perfect in every way that mattered. "It's beautiful," I told her. She nodded, entirely unsurprised, and turned back to the easel to start another one. I took a long, slow breath of salt air, thought about the last line of that multi-page letter from the motel stationery, the part where Carla had written, in a handwriting I barely recognized, that she had always believed I needed the Freddles to survive. "You told me to learn to stand on my own," I said quietly, "to no one, to the wind, to the specific warm frequency of the afternoon air. I did. I watched my daughter paint in the last of the golden light, and I built an empire on the ashes of yours."